All right. Welcome again, everyone. My name is Khachik Muradian, and I'm a lecturer in the Middle Eastern, South Asian, and African Studies at Columbia University. And today I will be serving as moderator for this discussion. The lines between where and when genocide ends and post-genocide recovery begins are often blurred. And genocide casts a long shadow, with the targeted group struggling to emerge from under that shadow for decades, in some cases for centuries. The actions of the perpetrators are just half the story. The other half are the efforts of the targeted groups to resist, to organize, to rebuild, and seek acknowledgement and justice. Today's discussion on the Yazidi genocide delves into these themes. We are joined by three distinguished speakers, Perry Ibrahim, Murad Ismail, and Lisa von Jordan-Forgy, who will shed light on these aspects. Each will speak for about 10 minutes, followed by a question and answer session. A few words about ISA first. Established in 2023, ISA, the Institute for Security Analysis, is a research institute specializing in national security and foreign policy. With the aim of bridging critical information gaps, ISA's research areas focus on geopolitical developments, security and defense affairs, and hybrid warfare. I will now introduce all three speakers in order of their appearance, and then after which we will hear from them. Perry Ibrahim is the Executive Director of the Free Yazidi Foundation, established in August 2014 to support Yazidi survivors of ISIS-perpetrated genocide. The foundation's core values include advocating for women's rights, justice for gender-based and sexual violence, and rights of ethno-religious minorities. Perry advocates for equal opportunities and rights for Yazidis and promotes women's empowerment and gender equality in Iraq. Perry has represented FYF at prestigious platforms such as the United Nations Security Council, British Parliament, and so on. She holds a law degree from the University of Amsterdam. Our second speaker is Murad Ismail. He's the president of Sinjar Academy, completed his education in Iraqi Kurdistan, and earned master's degree in environmental engineering and geophysics from Norwich University and the University of Houston. Following the 2014 ISIS genocide against the Yazidis, he co-founded the Sinjar Crisis Management Team and was part of a delegation that secured US intervention, resulting in airstrikes on ISIS and humanitarian airdrops for Yazidis on Mount Sinjar. Murad co-founded the Yazda organization and the Nadia initiative, and now serves as president of Sinjar Academy, an educational initiative. He has traveled globally and to advocate for the Yazidi cause and served as Yazda's executive director for 4 years. Lisa von Jordan-Forgy is the executive director of the Lemkin Institute for Genocide Prevention. She is a distinguished expert in genocide studies, gender issues, and the history of colonialism. She has held prestigious positions as the endowed chair in Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Kent State College, and as the Dr. Marsha Ratikoff-Grossman Professor of Holocaust and Genocide Studies at Stockton University. Elisa earned her BA in History from Columbia University and her MA and PhD in History from the University of Pennsylvania. Her extensive knowledge and research contribute significantly to the fields of genocide prevention and gender studies. So now I would like to welcome our speakers to deliver their remarks. For those of you who have questions, and as questions come up, please make sure to use the Q&A option, and we will address your questions towards the end of the program. Thank you, everyone, and welcome again. Perry, would you like to take it from here?
Thank you very much, and thank you for organizing this. The sad thing about everything is that it's now almost 10 years. So this August, it will be exactly 10 years that the Islamic State committed a genocide against our people. And I'm sure Murad will talk a lot about the issues in Iraq. I can speak about a few subjects, one of them being justice and accountability. For a community like the Yazidis who've been attacked by the Islamic State, because of who they are. So genocide was obviously very clear because the Islamic State was not so shy to tell the world why they had to eradicate the Yazidis. I want to also say that the Yazidi community has been very strong in their advocacy, because what we saw was very quick reaction. I know Murad was one of the people advocating. I myself in Europe was trying to do the same thing to ensure that our people who were stranded on Mount Sinjar would have a safe way out. So now that it's been 10 years, it means, okay, when we look back, what has been done for our community? And unfortunately, when it comes to justice and accountability, there is not really a justice system in Iraq or in Syria, where majority of the perpetrators are. What we're now seeing is the UN investigative mechanism that was set up to investigate the crimes committed by Daesh, by the Islamic State in Iraq, is now going to be ended. So the mandate will be ended. This has a lot of impact on the Yazidi community and how to move forward. On one hand, you have all this information that has been gathered. What is going to happen with that? A lot of Yazidis, a lot of organizations put a lot of trust in UNITAD to make sure that the crimes that were committed in Iraq would not just fade away, that someone would find justice for the Yazidi community and for the Christians and other minorities who have suffered immensely. Now that the mandate of UNITAD ends, it also means that a lot of funding that was invested in this mechanism also is gone. It puts a lot of pressure on others, like, for example, Yazidi organizations who have done so much in the past 10 years, but also a lot of pressure on them for in the future. What is going to happen? How are we going to make sure that the crimes that were committed against our people are actually investigated, that we see cases in courts for the crimes that were committed? I'm not talking about terrorism. Terrorism, it's been very easy in different countries to charge perpetrators, even in Iraq, for terrorism charges. But we don't really see a lot of genocide cases or rape and murder, crimes that were committed by the Islamic State against our people and others. And this is very important because as our community are genocide survivors, you want to see perpetrators behind bars for the crime that they committed against you or your family. And terrorism won't do. So that's why, like, organizations like the Free Yazidi Foundations and others, we try to do crime scene analyses, make sure that the crimes that were committed against our people are investigated. This information goes to law enforcement around the world with the consent of the survivors, to make sure that wherever the perpetrators go, whether they're in Iraq, whether they're in Syria, whether they go to Europe or Australia or wherever they end up, that justice will be served, even if it's 10 years, 20 years from now. Justice is so important because finally, family members of those survivors and the survivors themselves can have closure when they have their day in court. And we understand that not everyone will get their day in court because a lot of the perpetrators are dead, but some at least will. And we have now a handful or so of genocide cases, majority in Germany. I know that other countries like the Netherlands, like Sweden, like France, are currently doing their own, the start of their own investigations and cases, case building. So we will see more of that. And of course, the Yazidi community, even though if UNITAD ends, the mandate ends, doesn't mean that we will stop doing our investigations, and will continue to do so. Another quick point is economic and political empowerment. We see a lot of politics in Iraq, but Yazidis don't have a voice. So each year, I feel like our community has been taken away something. So whether it's a voice in parliament or a quota seat that we are all advocating for, it is very important for ethnic and religious minorities to be able to be politically empowered. Once you take that away from them, things like the start of a genocide, the problems like root causes that arise, they'll just continue and won't end. And I feel like once you're empowered, whether it's politically or economically, you have a say in what is happening in that country, and in this case in Iraq, in this case also the Kurdish region of Iraq. And as long as our community does not have that, it's going to be very problematic to ensure that they can one day go back home and live a life, carefree life, without any worries, without feeling that the area they live in is unsafe for them because of who they are. We try within the Free Yazidi Foundation, we have economic empowerment programs to ensure that our people, even when the humanitarian aid ends, that our people understand how to become the breadwinners of their family, and specifically women. I know Murad and other Yazidi organizations were all trying to make sure that our youth is empowered, because I feel like our youth has lost almost 10 years of their life. And it is very concerning, because it's the youth that will bring us towards a better future for our people. And if they are losing chances and opportunities for education or work, you name it, that is continuing what the Islamic State wanted, right? They wanted to eradicate the Yazidis. They wanted to eradicate our voice. They wanted to eradicate our being on this earth. And by taking away, and that brings me to my last point, by taking away these things, like what the Iraqi government is trying to do by closing the schools inside the camps so that people would return, but for the people who are staying, that has a big impact on our youth, and it's unacceptable. I leave it to the rest of the group to continue the discussion.
Thank you, Perry. And before I invite Murad, I just want to remind everyone who joined that you can essentially post your questions under the Q&A option, and we will address them towards the end of the program. So next is Murad, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having us. Really, it's important to have this discussion. Also, I think a lot of the audience and from the Armenians or with Armenian roots, and we, the both people, the Yazidis and Armenians, share a lot of common values that we've got. I think because of our shared history and our history, both recent and in the past. So I really appreciate everyone who came online. I appreciate Armenia's position on the recognition of the genocide, and also, a lot of the friends from the Armenian backgrounds who came, to help the Yazidi community. I have a lot of friends who've, themselves were victims of genocide, who've come to the MENA region because of the Armenian genocide, and then when the Yazidi genocide happened, they really helped us a lot. I think there's kind of two things I want to mention. The progress that's been made over the past 10 years, and I think it's a lot of progress have been made. Given that the Yazidi community was a very small community who suffered very large problem, very big problem. If you go back to the first days of genocide, ISIS wanted to kill and enslave 500,000 Yazidis. But they ended up taking kind of killing and taking about 10,000 people. So still, we were successful in terms of rescuing our people from the genocide as it was happening, and that was done by many courageous people, by Yazidi friends, by the US and other countries who intervened militarily. So the intention of ISIS was much bigger than what happened, but we still lost a lot of people, about 10,000 people within like 2 weeks. I think Yazidi community was also successful, for example, in terms of defending the Yazidi cause, getting the Yazidi genocide recognized in more than 15, 16 countries. And that's not easy job to do. A lot of us, or a lot of you who've been involved in the geopolitics or the genocide politics and geopolitics is it's a very difficult topic to even get recognition. And without advocacy, without the right work, with the right setup, and without a lot of friends, a genocide could just go by and without notice. And my fear was always that this will not be noticed. I remember going to, for example, speak on some TV stuff, and we'll come back. This was in 2014, and they will say a few hundred Yazidis were reportedly or allegedly taken. So it took a very long time to get the genocide recognized from the United Nations. And one of the positive sides of UNITAD was a legal recognition of the Yazidi genocide based on the evidence and the investigation. And that was very important. And based on that, for example, the recognition in UK and in Germany and Netherlands were established. And before that, recognition in other countries, including Armenia, US, Australia, Canada, and a few other countries. And I consider these big successes. Also, a lot of the survivors were first from 7,000 people who were taken to captivity, about 4,500 have been rescued. And of course, the work have gone to that. It was a lot of work too, to get even a single person out was a very difficult thing, but still, we managed, and the Yazidi community, and also with the help of many people, that about 4,500 have been rescued. Of course, their state of mind and psychology and they still need a lot of support, but at least they're free. And from that also, countries have. Many of Yazidi friends have helped us in terms of relocation of the Yazidi survivors to Germany, to Canada, to Australia. Nearly 10,000 plus Yazidis, maybe even 12,000 survivors and their family members have managed to be relocated. And I think that was a positive step, because the situation in Iraq was not suitable for their treatment. And in addition to that, so as you also know, with genocide comes also migration and displacement. And that's how the Yazidi community lost its ancestral homeland in Turkey, how it lost in Syria. So it's just Iraq is really the last, let's say, the last country in the road for the Yazidi community to lose its homeland. I mean, we used to have more than 300 villages in Turkey, and a lot of us come from Turkish roots in the north, in the southeast of Turkey. But we lost our homeland in Turkey. Then we also lost it in Syria, which is from the beginning of ISIS in 2011. That about 80,000 Yazidis have migrated out of Syria. Only a few thousand live now today in Syria. So in Syria, the genocide against the Yazidi community was achieved, in fact, and kind of termination of the Yazidi existence in a region, or almost, and it's going to be in just a matter of years. More than 100,000 Yazidis have left Iraq in illegal format, mostly risking their lives. And these are also, I think, big stories of genocide where your people in thousands and tens of thousands leave, putting their children in the boats and try to just escape. Of course, more than half of the Yazidi community is still displaced as well, but about a half of them have managed to go back to Sinjar. I think the goal of ISIS was that to strip us from our homeland, and also to take our children and women and kill our men, but also to take our homeland. So, we managed to get our land back, and the Yazidi communities in Sinjar now. And to me, is that also a big thing. Of course, a lot on that still need to happen. On the positive side, I would say also, the Yazidi community is much more resilient today. We've never been resilient as of today. The Yazidi community tens of thousands of the Yazidi youth are going to universities, are successful in their education, in businesses. And, Yazidis are new to this world, basically. We're a community, in the mountains, mostly forced out of the civilized areas without education. Persecution of the Yazidis goes back hundreds of years. I mean, in our oral tradition, we say Yazidis have been subject to 72 genocides, and then 73, one in 2007, and then this one, 74 genocides. So we've had a long history of persecution, which led to isolation of the Yazidi community, keeping it distant from power, from education, from economics. The Yazidi community is back, and it's doing its best with what's possible. Of course, a lot still in the play, right? A lot of issues are still there, including, we have more than half of our people are displaced in about 15 IDP camps, and that situation have turned into a geopolitical situation. Also, the situation in Sinjar have turned into a geopolitical conflict between external and internal actors who fight on Sinjar, really not for the people, but I would say not for the people, but for the land and for the resources and for the geopolitical importance of Sinjar, which is in the triangle between the Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. So Yazidi community still have not been able to go back fully. Sorry, I'm just getting called. Yazidi community have not been able to fully go back, and we're working on that. Of course, that situation have also turned into a political conflict between Baghdad and Erbil, which Baghdad wants to close the camps and kind of force people, to Sinjar, which we don't support. We support voluntary return. We support rebuilding of our homeland and return of people with under their own satisfaction, and also when enough work is done in terms of repressions, in terms of accountability. Patty spoke a little bit about accountability, but we lost 10,000 people. We did not even get 10 trials for genocide. And I always, just look at these numbers. From 1,000 crimes, we have not even got one trial. And if you count the number of crimes committed against every single Yazidi individual, you're talking about at least 1 million crimes, individual crimes were committed. So we have not got any trials. And of course, trials in Iraq are done under terrorism law, which we don't support, because what happens is just like I call it, justice in darkness, or accountability in darkness, because we don't hear any information. They just take somebody to prison and then execute them, and we don't hear anything. I mean, if we will be too lucky if they just say, he participated in the massacres of Sinjar. That's the extent that we get. Politically as well, and geopolitically, the Yazidi community still struggle to find its place in Iraq. And I think a lot of us also just ask this, big questions, whether our community will even stay in Iraq long term, whether the genocide is just the beginning of this journey where Yazidis will be removed from the Middle East altogether. And I think if no serious work happens, if there is no serious commitment from the international community and from Iraq and from the Kurdistan region, I mean, I see that the Yazidi numbers will just reduce with time, and then at some point it will become a point of kind of no return. And for religious minorities, for communities, there is a certain level of your population. When once goes under that, then you really don't have a functioning society. And the Yazidi community is really at risk of they are already losing their homeland in Syria, but also they are at risk of eventually losing their homeland in Iraq. We need to think about the long term. I mean, a lot of our work have been short term, medium term, how to respond to genocide. But on the long term, we have to think about the Yazidi security, for course, as a number one. The Yazidi should be secure. There's, of course, geopolitical conflict where, some Yazidis have carried weapons in 2014 and they're defending their areas, or they are part of the different political and geopolitical, powers in the region. But, how do we transform that and make it a permanent security for the region and protect the region? There are still Turkish airstrikes, for example, on Sinjar. There are militias in Sinjar. There's a lot of competition on Sinjar. So a lot of this a lot of this needs to we need to sort out. I think also administration-wise, we would like to work on Sinjar, for example, to become a province in the future, because a province will allow it to receive its budget directly from Baghdad. It will remove some of the competition between Baghdad and Erbil on Sinjar. It's not just Sinjar, it's actually the disputed area. So all the strip of land that go from Kirkuk to Sinjar, these areas have never been safe because they never geopolitically been safe. There's competition, land grab on these areas, I think internally, but also externally now. Both Turkey and Iran are trying to have increased influence and military presence in these areas. The big question for the Yazidi community and for the minorities of Iraq, will we be able to establish a long-term security by the people of the area, of course, under the constitution of Iraq, and try to remove some of these geopolitical elements that are influencing potentially long-term security.
Thank you, Murad. As you and Perry were offering your remarks, a number of issues that you addressed, I felt like, we can spend some time perhaps in the discussion, delving deeper into that. You both talked about the importance of justice, courts, and the nexus, the connection between the courts in terms of also the historical record, right? This is not just about, finding the perpetrators and accountability, but it is also establishing the record on these, a million crimes, as you mentioned. The other dimension that, of course, is worth exploring further is diaspora identity and culture. Both of you are in DC, and therefore there is that kind of diasporic component that is worth, perhaps we'd love to hear from you on that front as well. Next, I would like to invite Elisa to offer her comments. Please, for those of you who have questions, write your questions and submit them using the Q&A function, and we will try to address them towards the end of the program. Elisa?
Hi, thank you, Hachig, very much for the introduction. And it's a real honor to be here for this commemoration event for the sort of 10th anniversary of the 2014 genocide against the Yazidis, the 74th genocide, as Murad mentioned. Particularly, it's an honor to be here with Murad and Perry, who've done so much work, both for the Yazidi people, but also for the cause, really, of genocide prevention globally. And I want to talk a little bit about that. It's also a great honor to be here with you, Hachig, and with Ara and Sevan, and here at the Institute of Security Analysis. So thank you so much for including me and for the invitation. I want to talk a little bit about the failure of the international community to properly respond to this genocide before, during, and after the genocide, with the caveat that that there was perhaps a much more direct and effective response than we've seen in almost any other case of genocide, and that was the I'm sorry, I'm missing the word, but the provision of supplies from the air by the United States that Murad himself was involved in organizing, that saved so many people, as well as the opening of a corridor through which Yazidis could escape ISIS forces. So that is, we have to admit, an incredibly creative intervention at a moment when it was most necessary to intervene. And some of the creativity of that is that it didn't require a kind of full-scale military response that wouldn't have been possible to get off the ground quickly. But it saved a lot of lives in the way that such a full-scale military response maybe also wouldn't have been able to do. So it was just a remarkable act of faith in humanity, right? Act of creativity and courage by the Yazidi people, by Yazidis organizing the diaspora, and by the allies and friends of the Yazidi. But, the genocide should never have happened, obviously, and we can say this of all genocides. But some genocides are easier to stop than others because they're easier to see. And here I want to pick up on something that Patty said, which is that ISIS was very open about how they viewed the Yazidi. They were very open about how they viewed other ethnic and religious minority groups in Iraq and Syria. There was already global experience with ISIS in Syria, right, and how they had treated the communities that they had overrun. And there was, we have some evidence that there was knowledge that ISIS was building up power, right, on the border with Iraq, within Syria, and was going to invade. And we know the difficult narratives that have emerged out of that fact, right? The fact that the Yazidi were left stranded when the Kurdish Peshmerga retreated in the face of an ISIS invasion. And the fact that the Yazidi then were not prepared because they had counted on the Peshmerga's support for their security. So that's a very difficult subject, and I don't think we want to get into that. It's a very political subject, and it's not the point that I want to make. The larger point I want to make is that, we're in a time now, and I think the Yazidi genocide was an early warning of this time. But we're now in a time where the world is being redivided amongst global powers, both regional hegemons and then global hegemons. And these geopolitical interests, whether they are resources or land or people, these interests are very callous when it comes to the survival of ancient communities, indigenous communities, minority communities. And one of the major failures, I think, of genocide prevention trainings and scholarship has been to take this wider global geopolitical framework into consideration. And that means, that there just needs to be more work on getting more states and more actors at the table to understand how their geopolitical interests and their strategies for gaining those interests can undermine permanently the security of ancient groups on their land. Now, in some cases, the removal of groups from their land is the goal of the genocide. And there are many regional and even international forces that are in that collude, right, for that end. And so that's also something that we need to analyze when we're doing genocide prevention, is who is profiting from this. And these analyses have to be going on all the time. Now, this is a type of work, since the 1990s, there's been this growth in interest in genocide prevention, and the UN has established an office and various initiatives, and there are institutes that do training in genocide prevention, and all of that is very positive, right? And there's the doctrine of R2P. All of that is very positive, and I don't want to take away from that. But within that, we're really missing a very important piece, and we don't have a place where it's being done. You would think that the UN office would be the perfect space for this constant analysis, global analysis of power and geostrategy and the different players, particularly the powerful ones. But it's not. It's not doing that. It's underfunded, understaffed, and really has very limited capacity, as I think we've seen in the last year in particular. So that's a space that's completely devoid of any genocide prevention activity. And I think that space became to bear heavily on the fate of the Yazidis in 2014. And so first is that sort of failure of the international community to consider at all, right, the fate of small communities when their regions or their ancestral territory is in a disputed space. So that's one. The next point I want to make is that, we don't have really very sensitive early warning mechanisms. You know, they exist, and the UN has a framework of analysis, but it's rarely used. The UN office doesn't have capacity to use it in most cases. We have Genocide Watch with its 10 stages. Lemkin Institute has its 10 patterns. You know, everyone's trying to do a little bit, but what we need is a global, integrated early warning mechanism that triggers, right, an alarm, basically, when a situation, you know, reaches a certain stage of red flags. When it's racked up enough red flags, there's an alarm triggered. And, you know, the entire world can look at this space before a genocide happens, so that we're not always reinventing the wheel and caught unawares, right? Genocide is not all that uncommon, unfortunately, and there are reasons to believe that it's going to become much more common as the 21st century continues. So we definitely need a mechanism like this, and we need to work better at the level of global diplomacy to get buy-in from regional and international powers into such a mechanism. There's also the absence of the prioritization. Now, for everyone who was active in the region, and you know, who were friends of the Yazidis or allies of the Yazidis or protecting the Yazidis at this time, there really was an absence of prioritization of security for minority communities. And so we have to just make sure that that's always at the forefront of everything that's done in war and in peace and in peacekeeping, right? And when there is internal conflict, that people are thinking with a genocide prevention framework and forefronting vulnerable communities, communities that have faced genocide in the past, communities that are small, communities that are marginalized, communities that are disparaged, right, by their neighbors, just communities that have vulnerabilities to genocide. Furthermore, I was in northern Iraq and in Sinjar actually in 2016 and 2017, several different times. And this was really the origin of the Lemkin Institute, came out of the experience that I had, and then my colleague Irene Massimino, who's an Argentine human rights lawyer that we had there. And we saw just, you know, a real exploitation of the situation by scholars, by journalists, even by international organizations that were flying in and flying out. And there was very little partnership, right, with Yazidi communities, IDFs, right? No, pardon me, IDPs, internally displaced persons, refugees, etc. And you know, we saw that exploitation, particularly with women, and particularly with women who had been rescued from ISIS captivity. There was an incredible international interest in sexual violence against Yazidi women. And, you know, you could be anywhere in the world and could read about in detail sexual violence that ISIS was committing against Yazidi women, but there was almost nothing on the ground to help them. Do you know? And we interviewed so many Yazidi women, not about the sexual violence they experienced, but about what their needs are, what do they want. And, you know, the responses we got were so, you know, obvious. Maybe a job, maybe the ability to be educated, you know, to go to school. These were some very young girls as well. To have places to go where they felt comfortable and they didn't feel people were looking at them. You know, these were very obvious things, but none of that existed in 2016, 2017. You know, and I know it's been very slow to get things like that off the ground since then. So there was very little collaboration with the Yazidi community in the wake, or, you know, right after, in the immediate aftermath of genocide. And I think that's a global problem where IDPs, refugees, displaced persons, survivors of genocide are not taken seriously as agents with voices who can really deeply influence the way that the international community reacts and that can help strategize, right? But are rather seen as the recipients of aid, if that aid is ever forthcoming. And so I think there's a real problem there in how we structure power in our responses right after genocide. And then, there were other examples of that. Irena and I were taken to newly discovered mass graves. This was in 2016, right after Sinjar was liberated from ISIS control. And there were these newly discovered mass graves that was predictable, because the world had heard about massacres, but they weren't secured. Like the Peshmerga and the Kurdish authorities were doing the best they could, I think, to secure them, but there weren't legally trained people securing those sites. And so, I remember speaking to one Kurdish official who said, yeah, it's really a problem. We've asked the UN, but they were here for a little bit, but we don't know what's going to happen. And sometimes the dogs come in at nighttime and they dig out the bones, and then we have to go gather the bones in the morning and put them back. And this was just, we felt that people were being abandoned by the international community in a way that we were shocked by. I was not aware before that time that there just is no legal mechanism for going into areas where we know genocide has been committed right after they're liberated. There's just no immediate trigger mechanism of lawyers who show up and begin to gather evidence. And so what happened is Yazidis and Christians and other marginalized groups gathered their own evidence for trials, right? And had to train themselves very quickly on how to make evidence appropriate for possible ICC trials, et cetera, et cetera. And so we saw this wonderful, wonderful resilience in the face of catastrophe amongst these communities with very little substantive international support. And I want to say that, finally, I think there needs to be an entire shift in the way that we work on genocide prevention. And as Hachig was mentioning at the beginning, this idea that genocide has a clear beginning and end is very wrong, right? These patterns of genocide can exist for hundreds of years, and I think the Yazidis know that. And therefore, we have to work within that knowledge that these patterns, if they're not stopped through from some kind of adjudication, through some kind of Truth and Reconciliation Commission, through some kind of system, if they're not stopped and taken, and society transformed in a different direction, those genocidal patterns continue. And I think one of the things that the Yazidis were, and then I'm going to stop talking, but one of the things that was so impressed me about Yazidi organizing is the way in which it really brought prevention to the 21st century. And what I mean by that is I often call, Yazidis the sort of gender scholars of genocide studies, who exactly the ones we needed. Because it was with the Yazidi genocide that this very common pattern of genocide that up to that point was not accepted within genocide studies or most official official capacities within governments, this very common pattern was brought to the public attention. And that is this pattern of killing men and abducting and sexually violating and abusing and enslaving women and children. This is a very common pattern of genocide in history, but it was not, up until that point, it was not understood widely as a form or a pattern of genocide. And the Yazidis have put that really on the table. And it's permanent, right? We can't go backwards from that. People see it now and they understand that. And a lot of the genocide recognition has resolved that problem. And so, I'm very thankful to the Yazidi surviving Yazidi communities for all that hard work they've done, because it will help other communities in the future for sure. But at this point, we have to continue working with the Yazidi. The genocide is not over, and it won't be over until Yazidis are secure in their ancestral homeland in Sinjar. Thank you.
Thank you, Elisa, for your intervention. Again, in this here as well, there's this emphasis on the role that Yazidis played, their voice, their actions, their agency, and I'm really glad that that is being emphasized and highlighted in the discussion today. In fact, as we transition into the discussion portion, I would like to perhaps start with this last point that was being made. In fact, with some of the comments that Elisa made related to the role that Yazidi activists played in telling the story, in pushing for acknowledgement, in pushing for, at the earlier stages, as was mentioned earlier, for the strikes against ISIS. So I'd like to invite the panelists to offer their reflections on that. And sort of connected to this, we have a question about resources. Joseph Tagdigian asks, are there any resources, either electronic or in print, to inform English-speaking individuals of Yazidi history, politics, geopolitics, culture, and the Yazidi diaspora? Moreover, are there any bills awaiting in the United States Congress dealing with Yazidi issues? So I will stop here, and I would like to invite our panelists to share their comments and reflections.
So, I may go first. I think I'm not aware of any bills at the Congress level. And the books, there are few, English books. I mean, I'm mostly familiar with the Arabic books, really, that's written in Arabic by the Yazidis who discuss the Yazidi, religion, culture, and stuff. And there are some really good Yazidi scholars like Khalid Jundi and others who've done really good work. Zuhair Kadam Aboud, who's a Muslim judge, Shia judge, who've written a lot of good books on the Yazidis. I'm not aware of English book, a lot of English books. Of course, the book by Nadia Murad, which we really work really hard on that book, and she worked really hard on that book. It has a lot of good details on the Yazidi community. I suggest reading it to understand the context of genocide, but also the Yazidi culture and the stuff. And when Elisa was talking, it's really like everything she was saying is like it was going through my brain and it's like all the way in. And it's just like once you've gone through this, and once people who actually know what genocide is, who don't, it's not just like reading it academically or reading what definition it is, but like living it a minute by minute with the details and knowing how failed the system is. How you don't like it's really there is just a parallel world that goes with our world, that when communities fall off the track or off the belt, when they are left alone for that, then they have their own track in life, which is not connected to anything else, anything normal. It's not connected, for example, to the justice, kind of the whole justice structure where somebody impacts you, affect you, then, somebody will come in response to hold them accountable. It's not in the movie, it's not like in the movies, that the loser wins at the end. It's not like, it's not like, humans have a value. It's, there are a lot of, for me personally, a lot of the definitions of things for me changed. The way I look to things changed. The one, for example, like UN, for example, to me, UN was like the place to go to for things. But, after gone through this for 10 years, I mean, I know what UN is. It's like an NGO, like, Perry and I, like, other people, it's an NGO, looks for funding mostly. I mean, I had many fights with them. I remember you went there to meet the survivors, when we were working with the UN, and they always wanted to use us to get funding for the UN institutions. And then for like 3 years, they never asked us, what's going on with the people who got rescued? Like, how can we help these people? They never asked that question. I had to fight with them, to step, because everywhere, like we had to advocate for more funding for the UN machine to run. Of course, there are some good things came from the UN. For example, the IOM staff, some of the UNDP, also some of it was like all corruption. The political UNAMI, for example, did some really good work for Iraq, but it's like things are 50-50. So 50 are just abuse, manipulation, just you send a celebrity to the UN, they will respect her so much because she's a celebrity. But if you send 5,000 survivors, nobody cares about what happened to them. It's really that, and it's really eventually at the end of the day, there is no system. I mean, there is no quick reaction force that goes stops a genocide. There is no there's nothing. Once you are left for a genocide, you are there for genocide, and you have to yourself do the job to protect yourself. And I very much always, I suggest and encourage people, individuals, to be powerful, because if you don't have individuals within a community who are powerful, and then if you don't have your community as a powerful society, you are unable to defend yourself. Do not expect that anybody will protect you. Do not expect that the state will protect you. There is a lot of manipulation in the state itself, in the political system, in the economic system. People are seeing more. It's really not, human rights does not have any much substance or some impact on the international relationships. We are facing this right now. For example, so a lot of countries who are our friends, but again, they have more interest with Baghdad, more interest with Erbil. So why would you listen to 500,000 Yazidis who are nobody in the world? Why do you hear Perry or Murad or somebody? And why, even though it's a human right wise, it's a important discussion, a dialogue to have. But there is why UK will, for example, stop selling weapons to Turkey, or the US will support, stop selling F-35s or 16 to Turkey, where Turkey goes and strikes Sinjar and kills the Yazidis there, when you have, $5 billion in the process to go. So there are a lot of these things, and nobody really, it comes back like whatever Turkey does, whatever Qatar does. I have to talk about this because Qatar just funded a reconstruction project in Syria. This is the place where they remove the people of Afrin, and Qatar, Turkey, other countries come in. They build new villages and they house Arabs who are not from that region. So this is an approved genocide and approved ethnical cleansing, which is funded by big countries. ISIS itself also ISIS was not created from the blue skies. I always say that ISIS was created because there was need to create such a group to geopolitically shift the situation in the region, and a lot of people saw that happening, and ISIS was created. It was not just, you always have nasty people around the world. Like we have enough nasty people in the US to commit 1,000 genocides here now, if the geopolitical alignment happens in a way that will serve them. But what happened in the Middle East and these countries, even in countries, they buy protection, they buy influence, they buy everything. And they really don't care about, what will happen to the Yazidis, what happened to the Yazidis, or what happened to the Christians, what happened to the Shias, what happened to the Sunnis. Even though they pretended that they came for the protection of the Sunnis, but how many Sunnis have been killed in Iraq and Syria? You're talking about 500,000 Sunnis who've been killed, maybe 400,000 in Iraq and Syria. Did they really come for the protection of the Sunni communities? Not really. There was a geopolitical game that was played out. I think for the Yazidi community. So I always say, you have to build within yourself the enough protection, the enough defense, the enough resilience, and that has to be in many, many ways. And Yazidi community are just starting the journey, and I'm sure for many of you who are Armenians, you know that. Like we saw Karabakh, for example, what happened. They just come in, remove your people from your land, and that's it, it's gone. And the countries who were supposed to be international protection for the people there, they were part of the plan, And it's a very nasty process. The world is a nasty place. I mean, there's the fantasy side of it. So you can live in a fantasy that everything is good as long as it doesn't touch you. And I was in that state before 2014. As long as it doesn't touch you directly, there's a fantasy that there is a system, there's justice, there's equality, there's gender, there's all that. And it's all true as long as you are in the good side of the world, like you are not the one who fell. But once you fall, then that whole thing changes. Yeah.
I would like to just echo what Murad says, and also just to take a few steps back at, like, if you look at like history and see the genocides and see how many genocides are actually declared in the US, how was it possible that the Yazidi genocide was recognized, and actually very quickly compared to other genocides that have happened previously? So I want to just say there's two differences. So Murad was doing advocacy in the US and I was doing advocacy in the Netherlands and Europe. Very different. In the US, you had people that were listening. in the Netherlands, you had people that were saying, well, if it's a genocide, we really have to look and investigate. And once there's a investigative mechanism that says, or a court that says it was genocide, then we can actually act on it. So the prevention of genocide in reality actually doesn't work. And the responsibility to protect civilians in need actually doesn't work. So with the Yazidi genocide, it was very clear that like our advocacy work was very at the forefront of like the outcome of what eventually became the recognition of genocide. It's people like Murad, people like myself and other Yazidis who've advocated constantly for the recognition of genocide. People on the call have to understand that like we as Yazidis and probably a lot of the Armenians, like we grew up hearing the stories of genocide. I can remember my parents constantly talking about the genocides previously that happened against our people and the hatred and the root causes that created all this hatred against our people. So when this happened in 2014, to me, it was very clear that it was a genocide. And we started to act on that. And I'm sure to Murad, it was clear this was a genocide against our people. They want to eradicate, ISIS wants to eradicate us because of who we are. And I feel like when that is clear, you immediately know what to say to those who are responsible to protect people around the world. It is just very unfortunate that like there's two different areas, right? Like you have the United States and you have in Europe decision makers that actually cannot do what you want them to do. So we in Europe, we only saw action once the US, when President Barack Obama came on television and said, we're going to start airstrikes against the Islamic State. And it was only then that the coalition was started and everyone joined. But before that, it was a big question mark in Europe whether this was a genocide or not. And they were going to just allow what the Islamic State was going to do, eradicate the Yazidis and other ethnic and religious minorities who they could get their hands on. Also, I do want to say a few things about why it was so clear that the Islamic State was committing genocide against the Yazidis. As the days went on, it was also very clear that like other communities were able to make a jizya, a payment, to leave or stay, whatever they wanted. But the Yazidis were immediately killed. This is a very big difference, and this clearly shows genocide and the intent to eradicate. And so we already had that as well. Like aside from the enslavement of our women and girls, eventually the Islamic State came out with their magazine called the Dabiq. In the Dabiq, in number 4, they talk specifically about why they had to eradicate the Yazidi community. They have specific wording as to like on Judgment Day, this would be a stain on the Muslim community if the Yazidis were to live. So the Dabiq is not available anymore, but we as Yazidi organizations, we have those saved. And we always refer to that as to show the genocide against our people. I saw that there was another question that I quickly want to answer as well. Like, what is currently being done for the Yazidi women and children that are in captivity? So I want to say that last year, I went to Al-Hol, I went to Syria to see if it was possible to find Yazidi women, to see if there was an opportunity to do rescue missions. I want to say that the world has failed the Yazidi women and children that are in captivity. And I'm saying the world has failed because I went to Syria. I saw the possibilities. I saw that there were opportunities to help our community members who are in captivity, but really the world has failed them. We did not get the funding and support that we needed to help those who are in captivity. And it is a very sad thing because we have all these women organizations, and as Murad said, the UN and others, everyone talking about women's rights and about children's rights. And like, here you have little girls as the age of 8-9 years being sold as sex slaves in markets in Iraq and Syria, and no one lifts a finger to get them out of captivity. Is that acceptable? Now, 10 years on, these children, these women, they have maybe forgotten who they are. There needs to be a effort to, I don't know, do DNA searches or something to locate the missing of the Yazidis. Thank you.
Lisa, would you like to comment? Perhaps the next question may be a way for you as well to segue and offer your thoughts. There's a question from Alena Mikaelian. What advice do you have to the young generation of communities that experience genocide when it comes to raising awareness about their communities in their Western, quote unquote, circles / environments, universities in the United States, workplace in Europe, etc.? Please feel free to share your observations and experience. Many thanks.
So I think, for Lisa, do you want me to go for that question? Yeah, I mean, I think you can, and anybody can do something, right? And I always say, do what you can, and based on your circumstances, your situation. I mean, I did this for full time for 5 years, but then I had to work. Then I left my job. I came back to my previous job before the genocide, and then I'm doing this on the side to. So always do something, and whatever. And I would say, see your own strength, your own circumstances, what you can do, because for example, what the influence Perry have in the space, I cannot. Maybe I'm not the person to have that. So find your own spot. I think always it's good to have friends, in the West, or in the countries where where you want to do advocacy. Not everything has to be done by you, or you don't have to also pay for lobbyists to do your work. I mean, having friends who care about the cause genuinely, and who can show up to events, to places, speak, who share your values. I think it's really good to expand this network of us as like-minded people who defend a noble cause. I think that's important. I also, I think I always say resilience of people. I mean, a lot of my work have now shifted to helping the Yazidi youth with education, with technology, with like being part of the economy of this world, with being, successful in their own lives, because you cannot compete. You cannot protect yourself if you cannot compete internationally. If you don't have good economy, if you don't have educated people, if you don't have people who are successful in their lives. And for the Yazidi community, the challenge is much, I think, bigger, for example, than the Armenia, which has its own country. I mean, if I was working on the Armenian cause, I would have tried to strengthen Armenia itself as a country to become technologically advanced country, the country that make weapons. So, let's say a country wants to take your land, and then, everybody would look to your country and say, well, Armenia is more important than country X, then let's support it. So you have to make yourself more valuable and more important, more geopolitically important, to protect your people. For the Yazidi community, unfortunately, we don't have that. Like, if you don't have land, and if you don't have population, if you don't have control, you have much less power, because you cannot give something in return. A lot of time Yazidis will tell me, Murad, why don't you do this? Why don't you do this? I said, if Murad had like 1,000 tanks and 60 F-35s, I would have done all this for you. But I don't have that. I don't have that. I don't have the money too. A country like Qatar can buy 50 universities with $5 billion, but I don't have the $5 billion to buy anybody. I don't have a media channel like Al Jazeera to go and speak on the Yazidi case, So if you think about, for example, and with my heart and my soul, I'm with the civilians of Gaza, for example, what happens to them. But what was the position of Al Jazeera and others on the Yazidi genocide when that was happening? Did they even bring a single article out for the world to care about it? So you eventually, you fight with everything you have, including, do you have media? Do you have military power? Do you have economic power? Do you have people in journalism to support you? It's not as fair, it's not a fair landscape. And for you to protect a people, a community, you have to build all aspect of its resilience, of aspect of its power. And sometimes also just talking alone does not help. Raising awareness is always really good, but raising awareness alone is not that useful. I mean, a lot of the success, I think, and another thing is like things come step by step. Like I remember we started by trying to just take some journalists to Sinjar to write about it. So like we had an article in New York Times, for example, was a very successful article. Then we started by having maybe, which was the Holocaust Museum to write a paper on what happened in Sinjar. Then, small things. Then there was the Commission on Syria. That they did some investigation of Sinjar. So things are step by step, and so it's really like it's really step by step. I think also be creative. Like I tell people don't follow anybody. Just follow what you see and what you think is the right thing to do, and try to be try to find your own way in this very and also no it's a very crazy environment that what's fair is not what happens. Like what was fair was not for people in Karabakh to be removed from their homeland for who've been living there for thousands of years. That was what was not fair, but it happened. And how do you reverse that, for example? I mean, it's like, so you have to ask these questions, what's the best way to do it? And just do the minimum, do what's possible. I think always do what's possible. For example, so before the genocide, we were looking to the ICC, International Criminal Court, that the God. It's like the God. Whenever something happened at genocide, you go to the ICC. But with time, we realized it's also a political organization that moves by certain dynamics, that only cares about certain situations. When some geopolitical alignment happens, then they look into a case, and then also the mandate has to come from the Security Council. So, then we shifted our direction away from the ICC. We went to, for example, establishing of UNITAS. So, being flexible and changing on what's possible is really important. And I see a lot of young people like stuck into one thing, stuck into like, we're going to take the Yazidi case to the ICC. Okay, you cannot take it to the ICC. What's next for you? So don't stuck to one thing. Be innovative, I think, flexible.
I think also like I think Murad and myself and other Yazidis never thought like, okay, this is the way to go and we're going to start an organization. Like this happened because there was a need. And as Murad says, like you see where you fit in best. Like Free Yazidi Foundation is a woman-led organization. It was there because there was a need for that, not because I wanted to so badly start a Yazidi women organization. And I think also one thing that the Yazidis did not have is we did not have a lot of people who are not from our community go and defend us, go and speak for us, go and advocate for us. No, it was really all on the shoulders of the Yazidi community themselves. And, it's something to be really proud of. And in the last 10 years, I think we all have grown a lot. And we've also shown the international community that, like, ISIS tried to eradicate our people, but we're here to stay. And we're going to try to grow stronger. But I think also like with the Armenian community, as Murad said before, like we have a lot of things in common when it comes to genocide. We have a lot of things in common when it comes to survival and trying to maintain your identity, your culture, who you are, in a world that constantly attacks you. And I think that like together we're standing stronger. Together we can make sure that, so anytime something happens in Armenia or with our Armenian friends, we make sure to make a post about that. We make sure to speak about that, and vice versa as well.
Elisa?
Yeah, I don't have much to add. Those were such really great. I hope everyone was taking notes and this is being recorded as well. That's great. But those were really, really good suggestions for young people. I just want to add one quick thing to what Patty was saying, which is coalition politics are some of the most powerful forces politically that are out there. And so, yes, finding natural allies such as Armenians and Yazidis, but sometimes reaching out to communities where you don't really know what the response is going to be, and seeing if you can find any shared experiences, right, or shared values or commitments that would allow you to work with them as well. It's really important that people who are facing genocide, ongoing genocide, like the Yazidis, or people who are threatened by genocide, begin to form larger and larger coalitions locally and globally, so that this can't continue happening. Like, we really, really need a global force of people who are against genocide and who can prevent it. And the ones who can really speak about what this is and what needs to be done are the survivors of genocide, right? And so I think it's just really do coalition politics as much as you can. And it also helps you feel less abandoned, less alone, and less demoralized over time.
Wonderful. Perhaps this is as good a place and a time to conclude as any. It's 7:45. I would like to thank everyone who joined us. I would like to thank ISA for organizing this discussion. And most importantly, I would like to thank our three speakers for your insights, for your thoughts, and for the inspiration. In many ways, you know, we all here stand on the shoulders of survivors. We stand on the shoulders of people who, yes, were targeted for genocide and destruction, but somewhere they found the strength to organize, the strength to build coalitions, right? And to rebuild and to tell their story. And thank you all for being here, and thank you for being part of that experience. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.